All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. If I can get a wave from anyone online to make sure you can hear me. Yay. Okay, that's good. It's a good day when John can figure out technology. Um, I'm going to adjust the camera a little bit. Even I'm not that tall. Come on. There we go. All right. Yeah. Joey is still out on paternity leave, so he's left us to handle the audio video. But we're managing. We miss Joey, but he popped in. We did the pumpkin hayride the other day, and I think he popped in then. I think he's really enjoying the new fatherhood role that he has. We're really happy for him. Um, as you know, we've been pretty busy. If you haven't been in the conservatory yet, it's just right across the street. So I highly encourage you to get some time to walk around. Michelle and I, we're kind of putting our heads together about what Christmas is going to look like in there. So lots happening there. Um, we do have a couple more Tuesday gardening sessions coming up. Next week, we will have Eric from Old Salem giving a great presentation. He brought the Garden Historical Garden Society. I keep getting the official title. Their board meeting was in Winston the other about a week ago. So toured their board around, and they just loved what the conservatory has become. And you know, it's been really a delight to see people's reactions going in there now. But the week after that, on November 12th, we will have a talk on the soil food web. And this is one of the things that I highly encourage you. The more you can learn about what you can do for the soils, the better you will be in the garden. I always tell people it's kind of like building a house. If you go cheap on the foundation, you're going to have problems. Make the investment in your soil fertility, making sure you're doing the best thing for all the organisms in the soil, and it will reward you. And then finally, I'll wrap up the year on November 19th with the year in review, which obviously will be dominated by the greenhouse project. But we also have been kicking around, you know, we're never ones to rest on our laurels. We're still forging ahead on other projects. So we look forward to sharing some of that. And then one more thing, there are still some seats available for the wreath workshops. Those are, you know, the dates that are still available are December 2nd, December 4th. So that's a Monday and a Wednesday. And then on Sunday, December 8th, there's still a few seats left. But if you want them, you better snag them now because they probably will not be around much longer. So that's always a fun tradition. We have a lot of families that come out and that have been coming to that wreath workshop for years. And it's a fun event. Michelle does a fantastic job with that. With that being said, I'm here to, you know, very happy to introduce Christina Larson, who I've known over the years. We got to know each other mainly from the Guilford Horticultural Society, which is a fantastic program that unfortunately I think COVID kind of put that to an end, but we got to know each other about the symposiums we used to do. I think, you know, we probably first got to know each other a little bit. She was doing the Master Gardener program in Greensboro. You know, she met, you know, my cantankerous old man of a father, but I see the look on his face on the screen right now. Just kidding, Dad. No, but I mean, my dad was the one that got me into gardening, so he's responsible for all of this. But you know, through all that, and then Christina took over Guilford Garden Center and really turned that into being just a top-notch spot in Greensboro. And it's just only been within the last year that you've turned it over into new hands, and I'm sure they're riding your coattails, but still doing a fantastic job. She does a lot of work with garden consultation installs, also serves on the board of Greensboro Beautiful, so definitely not one to rest on her laurels, to use a foliage term. But you know, she's here today to speak about gardening for birds and butterflies, which, you know, it's something that we're all very cognizant about it isn't just about gardening for us, that there's wildlife that we need to consider. We all play an important role in being, just stewards of the natural lands. So I'm going to go ahead. I think I've got everything recording. Let me make sure. Yep, we're all set. So I'm going to turn it over to Christina. You want to hear Paul?
Thank you so much, John. Can everybody hear me? Here and at home, I hope. Hi, Hans and Ellen. It's really a pleasure to be here. As John said, we've known each other for a long time. I really admire his work. And, he makes it fun too. I mean, it's not just work when you're involved with a project with John. It's really an inspiration. So I hope that you all contribute either your time or your money to Ronaldo and help him out and help make these gardens even better than they already are, which is hard to believe. Our topic today, though, gardening for birds and butterflies, is a cause that's near and dear to my heart. How many folks in the room would say you are avid birders? Okay, I had a feeling that that's where we were going to be. So birding in the garden is not all about just throwing out a bird feeder and a bird bath and a bird house or two, right? It's about providing the foods that they need that they would naturally prefer year round. So we're going to get into a little bit first about hummingbirds, which for the most part have already left us to migrate back down south. Then we'll go into songbirds and finally more about butterflies. What do you got?
Sure, I'm having that panic of that I did not hit record. And I don't want to make that mistake again.
Don't have visual.
I hear you, Dad. Thanks.
Okay.
That's awesome.
I believe it is on record. I thought I heard recording in process.
Recording.
Yep. Okay. So needless panic attack. All right.
Good deal. So first of all, let's throw out a little bit of a test. I think you can say you're a plant geek if you have this going on.
Okay.
Anybody guilty? I know I am. It's like somebody says a common name and then you throw out the botanical name. Like, why? Just to show off, right? That's just who we are. So to get into the topic, native plant landscapes are increasingly disappearing, right? This looks like it could be up on the Blue Ridge. I had this photo from about 8 or 9 years ago, and I'm not sure if I was there or in Shenandoah Valley, but it's somewhere in the southeast, and you see a lot of great butterfly plants there, which also in turn will attract birds. And I think this is Brookberry Farm. No, I'm just kidding. Anybody live out there? It's beautiful, but it just goes on and on forever, right? So, as we make more homes and businesses and other related buildings for humans, what happens? We're losing a lot of that native plant landscape. So as we think about our ornamental plant choices, we do love our azaleas in the South, right? They are beautiful. The old-fashioned ones that only bloom once still have a place in my garden, and I hope they do for you as well. Increasingly, we see folks getting into the rebloomers, and there's several brands of those now. So you get not just the spring bloom, but a little smattering in the summer, and then, a nice flush again in the fall. But I want you to consider a native alternative, the Piedmont azalea, okay? Rhododendron canescens. Butterflies and hummingbirds love it. And anywhere you have butterflies are bird food, okay? I hate to break it to you, but moths as well. So, if you plant the species that the butterflies and the other beneficial insects need, the keystone species, if you will, the host plants, then the birds will come in and take their fill. And I look at it this way. If, let's say, I've got a patch of milkweed and a female monarch comes in and lays 100 eggs. And out of those 100 eggs, we get 100 caterpillars. And out of those 100 caterpillars, 95 get eaten by a bird. Well, that still leaves 5 new butterflies, right? So nature finds a way. So don't be deterred when you see, things getting eaten that you planted intentionally to attract. It's part of the food web. So the Piedmont azalea, it's going to be kind of a edge of the woods type situation. Filtered light is really good for these. It gets pretty big as it sort of spreads out and reaches for the sunlight, 7 to 8 feet-ish, not especially fast growing. So buy the biggest one you can. But under a deciduous canopy, you're going to get winter sun, which is going to help it grow and get ready to bloom in the spring. They do bloom a little later than the non-native azaleas, so that's kind of nice. Because spring is easy, right? When everything is in bloom at one time, I mean, we just sit there and admire it, and it's beautiful. But how about May, June, July, and on? We want to plant for a succession of blooms. So jumping right into hummingbirds. I have personally observed black and blue salvia, which is not native, in my garden being the #1 thing that hummingbirds are attracted to. And here's the deal. Anything with a trumpet-shaped bloom, okay, it fits the long beak of the hummingbird, right? So you're looking at things like black and blue salvia, cardinal flower, crossvine. We'll get into some of those. I also want to look at companion plants for these guys. Things like bee balm. Anything that has a flower that a butterfly can land on is going to be attractive to them as they're looking for nectar. But you could also add in some purple fountain grass, some profusion zinnias, which any zinnias are just a dynamic butterfly magnet. But the profusion zinnia is a little clumper. It's probably 18 inches and just a little muffin shape and just covered in blooms, especially late summer into fall. So consider that one for front of the border. You can get a pack of zinnias, of course, for $2.99. It's probably got 50 seeds in it, and they're fast growing. Getting back to a native, though, Lobelia cardinalis, the cardinal flower. This one is cool. Not only is it designed for the hummer's beak, but it's actually, the plant is sort of a hermaphrodite. It has both male and female flowers. So as the hummingbird moves from flower to flower, the top of its head actually pollinates the plant. So very symbiotic relationship. It does like wet feet. It can really tolerate sun or shade. I would say maybe morning sun is probably better than full sun, but don't count out Lobelia cardinalis in your garden. Yeah, we talked about this, how the pollination occurs. So the more mature flowers on the lower part of the stem are they turn from male to female. How cool is that? How freaky is that? Then we get into penstemon. I do like this particular cultivar called Dark Towers. You'll usually see Husker Red has been around for a long time. But Dark Towers is a little bit darker on the foliage. It has kind of a very light pink flower, blooms May and June. For me, it usually starts about second week of May and continues to mid-June. 18 to 36 inches tall, really depends on how much sun and how good your soil and water situation is. Once it's established, it can take dry soil, so consider it for kind of the edge of the property where you don't want to drag a hose if you don't have irrigation out there. And it's deer resistant. This is one that my neighbor, when she first saw it blooming, she said, "What is that?" And she's an avid gardener. She had never seen it. So as it reseeds, guess what? It has populated the whole neighborhood now. Anything yellow, gold, chartreuse, I love chartreuse plants, or blue or silver will go well with a dark foliage plant. So think about those choices. Something like blue star juniper would be a good one because it also likes dry conditions and full sun. Any of the blue carexes would be good as well. And then who doesn't love hibiscus? Now this is actually Rosa Sharon, which is Althea, or it's now being called hibiscus. It's one of those reclassifications, but it is beautiful. It's got these dinner plate size flowers, long blooming. There's a lot of different sizes available in Rosa Sharon, and many today are sterile or nearly so. So it's not your grandmother's Rosa Sharon that made little babies everywhere. This particular one, Little Kim, I think stays about 3 by 3. But just, to kind of comment and expand on that, having been in the nursery trade for a while now, I can tell you take plant tags with a total grain of salt. Like whatever it says, just figure it's going to be double that if it's happy. That Anna's Magic Ball arborvitae is supposed to be 1 by 1. I planted them at my neighborhood's entrance around the sign. They got 2 by 2, 2.5 by 2.5. We prune, got them back to like 1.5. They went back to 2.5 on their way to 3. We took them out. So take it with a grain of salt. Those are averages, okay? Companion plants for this one. Think about evergreens to pair with your deciduous or herbaceous plants. So anything like a boxwood, small hollies, arborvitaes, some of the viburnums, and then coneflowers, phlox, and lavender also work really well. I like to clump pollinator plants together so that the bees and butterflies can work a patch at the same time. And they don't seem to be bothered by the hummingbirds. Sometimes the hummingbirds will get a little overly aggressive, right? We've all seen that. They just kind of go away and come right back, go away and come right back. They all seem to live in harmony. And since we're talking about companion plants, let me point you to a really cool resource, Design Shortcuts. There's a magazine that I like, I've subscribed for years, called Garden Gate Magazine. And one of the things that they do very well is they have these design templates. So you get it in the magazine once a month, or I think they actually have 2 versions of the magazine now, so you can get it twice as often. But you can also go online and get these. And, you know, it gives you the layout and the cultivar names and everything you need to plant something that looks like that. That's just one example, but there's tons of them. Continuing with hummingbirds, definitely consider crossvine. You know, it wants, in my garden, it wants morning sun. Where I've got it, it can kind of continue to grow in a little bit deeper shade, but it's very semi-evergreen there. So if you want the real full effect, give it at least morning sun, if not a little bit more than that. You know, it'll climb on anything it can reach. A lot of vines will, right? So, you know, be very judicious about where you put vines, especially even more so major wheeler honeysuckle. Absolutely stunning plant, really beautiful. Hummingbirds love it, but you give it a 10-foot trellis to grow on, and then there's a building 6 feet away, it's going to touch the building and keep going. This plant is really cool for migrating hummingbirds. If you've ever looked at the hummingbird migration map online, journeynorth.org, you'll see them coming up from Florida, and then they get into Georgia and South Carolina. And by the time they hit Charlotte, I just refresh the map every day in the spring. By the time they hit Charlotte, you figure it's just a couple days before they hit the Triad. And you'll notice that the columbine comes into bloom at almost exactly the same time. It used to be the 1st of April. Now it's probably, you know, mid to late March. You know, is that a coincidence, or is that why they're here? Because they know that that flower is going to be available for them. As much energy as they need, they've got to have blooming plants when they first arrive. So yes, get your hummingbird feeders out, but also consider that they know these plants and they'll be looking for them. All right, we'll get into a couple of shrubs as we go through. And this one is really interesting for the shape of its blooms. This is buttonbush, and there's a dwarf variety called Sugar Shack. If you don't want it to get too tall and wide, they say Sugar Shack is 4 by 4. I just pruned it last year from about 5.5 by 6. It's still smaller than the true native, but it's not, in my garden at least, it's not what's billed on the plant tag. You know, it just looks very space age, doesn't it? With that one round bloom at the end of the stem. It blooms on new wood, so go crazy with pruning it to keep it whatever shape you want. Just do that in late winter or early spring. Okay, let's talk about some songbirds. I've got, and I imagine a few of you do as well, a solar activated bird feeder camera. So I get updates every hour about who's at the feeder. And, you know, it's usually your usual suspects, cardinals, titmice, lots of finches, a few bluebirds now and then. chickadees. So it gets a little boring after a while until you mix up the seed and see that, hey, different birds are attracted by different seed, right? So the same must be true with plants. Different birds are attracted to different plants. What do they need? Well, here's one that I planted this tree absolutely just to get this bird. Serviceberry, and this is not the only thing that cedar waxwings will eat, but they do love serviceberry and they will gorge on the berry. They'll come in flocks and gorge on these berries in the fall when they're migrating through. Now, I have yet to see one on my serviceberry in Summerfield, but I also have a home in the mountains, and there, just serendipitously, there was a Prunus virginiana planted, which is one of the common names is bird cherry. And I'm sitting there on the front porch one day, just drinking my coffee and watching to see who comes and eats the berries. And this is in July when the berries ripen. And I look up and I saw a robin. I was like, well, that's curious. I didn't know they would eat berries, but okay. And then I heard a different sound, and I looked up again, expecting to see the robin, and I saw a cedar waxwing. So that's the only one I've seen so far, but you know, there's still hope. I've got the serviceberry here, and I'll try to make time in future years to sit still a little bit. Winterberry is another great one for mockingbirds. You know, the mockingbird has a wonderful range of songs, right? So it's really entertaining to sit and listen to them. Pretty much any plant with berries, you're going to get birds. We know that, right? But the mockingbird is interesting in its aggressiveness towards other birds and sometimes cats and people. So steer clear, especially during nesting season. Cornus florida, the native dogwood, is great for bluebirds and many other songbirds. You know, things that either flower or in berry at various times, there's a pattern to that, right? And so when we see migrating birds coming through that we don't see at other times of the year, like I just saw in my bird buddy, I saw a rose-breasted grosbeak come in, and I couldn't tell which type of seed he was trying to get, but I turned my Merlin Bird ID app on to listen to the song and make sure and confirm the sighting, and sure enough, that was a new one for me. All right, here's that bird cherry that I told you about. These drupes of berries are really prolific, and you know, it loses its leaves very early, and when it does, you can see all the birds' nests that were in there. Because in the mountains, for example, you know, we were zone 5B, now we're 6A there, 3,600 feet. The leaf drop happens earlier, as you might imagine, than it has here. So we get to see, you know, fall come through, all the fall color, and then the leaf drop, and then we see all those birds' nests that were in this tree. That how apt was that the parents could just go and get the berries in July because they have some late nests, some late broods. So a number of different birds that I've got listed here will eat those and plant it, and they will come. Now, this one's kind of tough to find in the trade, but you can get my contact information from John, or I've got a few business cards. I can find this tree for you if you're interested. Next is American Beautyberry, which is really beautiful. It's a color purple that is kind of hard to find in nature. But as you know, it's a very large, very sprawling shrub. So make sure you have plenty of room if you plant this. And make sure you get the native, because you will hate me if you accidentally plant the Asian species that make copies of themselves all over the place. Especially if you have a slope. Ask me how I know. Beautyberry everywhere. But this one supports more than 40 species of songbirds. What I've noticed, though, is that it is not their first choice. So they'll go eat a lot of other things, and then when those are all exhausted, this is kind of a backup for them well into the winter. And don't discount foods that we like to eat, like blueberries. One of my friends called me and said, I've got birds eating my blueberries. What do I do? I said, plant more blueberries. Please don't cover them with nets. The birds will get trapped in there.
No.
You may want to try like one of those big blow-up snakes. They look really fake. They look like a cobra. It scares me. but it does seem to deter the birds as long as you move it around occasionally. What I don't recommend are the rubber snakes. I was at a client's home in Greensboro recently, and as we were walking through the bed, she said, "Be careful, there's a rubber snake over here. It'll startle you." And I looked at it and I was like, "Yeah, it looks like a copperhead. It's pretty scary." And we walked into another bed. She's like, "There's another one here, but something bit the head off of it." Well, the whole snake was gone by the time we got there. So who knows what unsuspecting bird got fooled by that rubber snake. So you might not want to do that. And the thing too is when we get into the vaccinium species that attract butterflies and moths, if you think about caterpillars and small insects, those are protein, right? And all nesting birds need protein for the young in the nest. So it's all part of the food web. Don't be alarmed by it. If the first time you see a Luna moth and you're just marveling at that at dusk, and a cardinal comes along and grabs it, say, "Oh, well, I got to see the Luna moth right before he became dinner." But think about it. The babies in the nest, their beaks aren't developed enough to be able to mash a berry or eat a seed. They can't fly and go get food, so the parents have to bring it to them. So they really need soft foods like caterpillars. Oaks, of course, are the #1 keystone species. I think now it's been documented over 600 species of butterflies, moths, and other insects use an oak tree as their host plant. So, if you're distressed about all those falling leaves, just think of the benefit of all the baby insects that are going to be born as a result of that tree. And then if you're into viburnums, there's a couple I can recommend. One is possum haw or Viburnum nudum. The other is Viburnum, shoot, it just left my mind. I just saw it yesterday at the Bicentennial Garden. I'll come back to it. It'll pop back in my mind. But there are a number of viburnum species that do berry, so those are good as well. As I said, oak trees are the #1 larval host. But also, I was sitting in the parking lot of a shopping center in Greensboro this morning and saw blue jays coming into a willow oak. And it's almost the only time I see blue jays is during acorn season. But they don't wait for them to hit the ground where the mammals are going to get them. They're up in the trees getting them as soon as they ripen. So kind of fun to watch. Asters and cornflowers will attract goldfinches, but there's a whole lot of others for goldfinches. Think about green and gold as your ground cover. They'll get in there and forage through the winter. That's a great native replacement for English ivy. English ivy, when I encounter a homeowner with it, I encourage removal, but it's a job once it's allowed to really spread, especially if it's getting up trees and buildings and going under fences. It's almost as bad as bamboo. A little easier to remove, but this is a beautiful and useful plant to replace it with. Coneflowers, definitely. The seed heads, I noticed in the mountains this weekend, my coneflowers had almost completely been devoured of seed. There were a few seeds left, and I went ahead and spread those around to get more coneflowers. We had a problem with rodents eating the roots, and so I need more. I didn't want to leave it to chance. And Rebecca is the other one, right? Black-eyed Susans. If you have a patch of black-eyed Susan and you come out in the morning, you're going to, 9 times out of 10 in this time of year, startle a flock of goldfinches, right? And they all skitter away. It's just wonderful. It's so fun to see them. The other plant they like is sedum, the tall sedums. If you've ever noticed where the leaves are nipped, they have this serrated edge around them, that's the birds getting water. So keep your bird baths full and clean if there's no other water source nearby, or just tolerate the serrated look of the leaves on your sedum. I've had to move sedum, I think, 3 times in my garden. Once to get it away from deer, once to get it out of an area that was too wet. And then now I'm like, well, the birds love it. it stays. It's out by the mailbox where I never drag a hose, so it's happy out there. This one is one of the true blue flowers that I really love, Caryopteris or bluebeard. I don't know anybody who actually calls it bluebeard, right? It's one of those plants that seems to have caught on more with the botanical name than any common name, but it is really beautiful. You could treat it just like a perennial, just, you know, cut it to the ground or close to the ground, let it regenerate. If you have a microclimate that's really warm, it may go ahead and be more cold hardy all the way to the tips, but experiment with it and see. You know, you could cut half of it back and see what happens to the other half. But I just love the color, and, you know, again, it's bringing in the butterflies and the bees. And no talk about caterpillars would be complete without including milkweed. And as curator of the butterfly garden at the Greensboro Arboretum for 5 years, we did install a monarch way station there, which requires that you maintain a minimum of 12 milkweeds. And we tried the orange butterfly weed, and in that particular garden, it just didn't do as well. It's very close to Buffalo Creek, which floods when we have excessive rains, which seem to come more frequently now. And so we said, well, you know what, let's put the swamp milkweed in there. And sure enough, not only did it take hold and thrive better, but my observation was that side by side, the swamp milkweed is much more attractive to the female butterfly than the other one. There's more leaf surface, is my theory. So she can lay a lot more eggs on that. This next one was another friend who called and said, I've got caterpillars. Oh no, she said, I've got worms on my parsley. What do I do? What did I say? Plant more parsley, or fennel, or carrots, or dill. They love all those. So swallowtail caterpillars or cats need anything in the carrot family. And I particularly like the bronze fennel better than the regular plain green fennel. I don't harvest the bulb to use it in the kitchen, so you know, the top has a little bit more interest to it. So try that one. It's perennial, so that's a plus too. You can also pair it with yarrow and zinnias to really create this wonderful kind of cottagey, almost, you know, meadow-like appearance. And then when it goes to seed, guess who comes and eats the seed? More songbirds. So this is a shot of bronze fennel at the butterfly garden at the Greensboro Arboretum. There's an overlook there. If you've never been there, on Ashland Drive, there's a place where you can pull in and look from above and see the Chip Calloway tongue-in-cheek design of two butterflies end to end, which, if you know anything about butterfly life cycle, that's how they mate. So it's kind of funny that he chose to depict it that way. But what we attempted to do was keep the same design in each of the four wings of those two butterflies. And what we found was that when you put fennel in, if you don't deadhead it, you're getting a whole lot more fennel. So we ended up having to remove quite a bit of it. And I think the next year we went with Joe Pieweed. Well, guess what? Same deal. You get a lot more of it. This is one of my favorite host plants, not only for the fruit, but because the zebra swallowtail is so beautiful. So I have seen some zebra swallowtails in my neighborhood at my neighbor's house and said, hey, they're probably from my pawpaw trees. So that's a lot of fun. Pawpaws need part shade. So it's another one of those maybe afternoon shade type situations. And just be patient because it takes them a long time to bloom, to fruit. You do need two from different genetic stock. They don't have to be male, female, or not dioecious, but they do need different genetic stock. So buy them from reputable growers that know where they got them from, and make sure you're getting two different ones or more. More is always better. And hands down, this is my absolute favorite caterpillar. Quick story about this guy. He's super cute, right? This is the spice bush swallowtail caterpillar. And I planted spice bush right next to my serviceberry just so I could get spice bush swallowtail caterpillars. I don't care about the butterflies as much as the caterpillars, right? In this species, at least. And so the first time I saw one, I was getting ready to, I have a mural in that garden, and I was getting ready to clean the mural. And down on a fern, right below the mural, I see the caterpillar. And of course, the fern is not his host plant. So he's probably at that point 8 feet from the spice bush. So I knew what he was getting ready to do. He was going to climb up that wall that the mural's on, he or she, and pupate. And it's a 10-foot wall. So I got a cold beer and I sat down and I watched. And it took about an hour for that caterpillar to climb the wall. And as he did, I began to hear more and more bird chatter in the trees. And I thought, well, surely they're not going to eat him with me sitting right here. I'm like the bodyguard, right? He got to the top of the wall and I was getting ready to watch him pupate. And I looked down for a second. I heard a chirp, just a tiny little noise. Didn't see the bird, but there were a lot of titmice in the area. And I looked up and he was gone.
Mhm.
So, lunch happens. Spice bush is dioecious, meaning you do need male and female to get berries. I don't care about the berries. I do have 2 spice bush, but apparently they're the same gender. I don't care. You get this beautiful fall color. So it's just a great plant no matter what. This next one, I'm going to tell you, over the years, I've tried it a few times and I have trouble getting it established. I have a few clients that have been successful with it in situations where they have moist woodland acreage. So think like where you would see moss growing, more in a pine woodland than, in hardwoods. But it's really beautiful. When you hike in the mountains, you'll see a lot alongside trails. And it's literally partridge berry because partridges love to eat the berries. Now, what is a partridge in our area? Doves. Okay. So I haven't seen doves feeding on it in my garden, but again, I don't spend enough time there watching. So that's a goal. Definitely consider the creeping phloxes, any of the phloxes. The tall garden phloxes are great. The creeping phloxes, because it's an early spring bloomer, really late winter for us these days. It's a great nectar source on those warm days in winter when nothing else is really available. Maybe some hellebores, maybe some columbine. But, a sunny border or over a rock wall is a nice place to have this one spilling so that, we're supporting the insects that are then going to feed our birds. Coreopsis. I absolutely adore Coreopsis. There are a lot of different types. Some have the real skinny leaves. Some have wider leaves. The tick seed that I've got out by the mailbox is a real nice spready little guy. It's called Zagreb, Z-A-G-R-E-B. It's more of a gold than this one. But it also comes in reds and different colors, red and yellow. What I've seen is that the Zagreb is the best one if you want to get a nice size patch of it. And it's a long bloomer, late spring through almost late summer. It kind of dies down. And if you deadhead it, you'll get the foliage coming back and regenerate it for next year. You don't have to deadhead it though. It's very self-cleaning. So these are just a few of my favorites for attracting songbirds and hummingbirds to the garden. I'm sure that you'll remind me of some that I didn't think about. And I'm going to invite you to visit the Greensboro Arboretum if you haven't been there lately. Just a couple of, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we put in a wildflower meadow, wildflowers and grasses. So we've got beehives in that area, and you can observe which plants the bees go to more readily, but you'll also see a tremendous variety of songbirds coming through and making use of the grasses and the different flowers, the seed heads. There's interpretive signage there, as well as in the butterfly garden. And we're planning a bird garden that we use most of the plants that I've included in this presentation as well as about, I think last design iteration, we've got 7 different custom designed birdhouses that each accommodate a different species of bird. And it's based on their wingspan. So making sure that they can get into the house and they can also get out, putting little ladders for the babies so they can hop up, because they're not really confident about the wing thing yet when the parents are saying, all right, time to go. So this particular builder of birdhouses always includes that. And he uses reclaimed materials from barns that are torn down and different sites like that. So come check that out. Then we also, I'll tell you about this one real quick. This is at the Bicentennial Garden, Tanger Bicentennial Garden, right next to Friendly Shopping Center. We did this one, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago as well. It's a rain garden with the idea of introducing to homeowners that if you have a problem with rainwater, excess rainwater on your property, and who doesn't, unless you're in a condo or townhouse, instead of piping it off your property to make it somebody else's problem, it's your rain, keep it on your property, but use it wisely. And so you can install a rain garden that's both beautiful and functional. And this one, when we first dug it out to put the stone in, we had a pretty hard rain. It was like a whole 1/4 inch. And it filled that space and didn't drain for a week. So we said, we may have miscalculated why this area was already wet and why we needed to use this area. So we dug down deeper to see what was going on. And you know how sometimes you'll dig down into what you might think is the subsoil, but it's really this layer of gray anaerobic clay, and it stinks. It doesn't drain. That's why that area was wet. It had been turf, and the staff was like, look, it's always wet. It's hard to mow. We'll put a rain garden here. And we're like, okay. So now we know why it's wet. So we had to pipe the water out. So this is our little secret now. Don't tell anybody, but there is actually a drain under there that takes it out to the creek. Nonetheless, we have demonstrated the idea of a rain garden and some of the plants that you can use there. You can see black-eyed Susan, red twig dogwood, hibiscus. I can't remember which grasses we used. I want to say Pennisetum, maybe Carly Rose. It's actually, if you go to greensborobeautiful.org, you'll see it there under the Tanger Bicentennial Garden. And anytime I visit botanical gardens like Rinalda, like the Bicentennial Garden, I'm always pausing long enough to see the birds and the other wildlife that come in and think intentionally about what we can do, not only in that garden, but in my own. And I hope I've inspired you to think that way today as well. So with that, I'll take questions. Yes.
Comment on the distinction relative benefits of cultivar versus the true native?
Sure.
I tend to lean toward the true native, but they're hard to come by.
For sure. Okay, so it has been hotly debated by folks much more knowledgeable than me, but I'll tell you what I have learned and what I believe about straight natives versus cultivars. If the flower color, for example, is the same color as the native, that's a plus. If the shape of the flower and the arrangement of the petals is the same as the native, that's a plus. If the insects cannot get to the bullseye, the center, that's a minus, right? So double cone flowers, for example, you can't find, where is the nectar? Where is the pollen? And it very often means that the plant is sterile, right? So we want to consider that. But if it has been bred just to have more flowers without making it sterile, I'd say for me, that's okay. If the leaf color is different, probably not so good. An example, leafcutter bees like to use a number of different plants. Roses are one, redbuds are another. What I've seen is that they will use the green leaf redbuds. They will not use the purple leaf ones. They don't recognize it. You all know what leafcutter bees do, right? They cut that little semicircle out of the edge of the leaf, and they roll it up and they're going to put it in the bottom of one of your pots or any hollow spot that they can find. They put the pupae of their larvae in there and they provision it for when it hatches, and it's a little nursery. And it's a super cool thing. But yeah, they won't use the different leaf. So I would advise that if you're concerned about, should I get this straight species Echinacea purpurea versus, I don't know, Magnus, for example, which is just a tall one. Just research a little bit, go especially to Mount Cuba for their research on pollinator favorites. They'll rank 100 cultivars of a different plant just to see which ones get the most insect activity, the most seed, pollen, all different attributes. Great question.
Say you have access to both, but the native would be better, or you're saying that if it has the prettier flowers and it's so much for the pollinators?
I think it's a case-by-case basis. If I like the native enough for the purpose that I'm installing it, absolutely, I go with that. I'm not looking for a cultivar to replace it, but it really just depends. Spice bush is spice bush. It doesn't need any improvement. Maybe somebody will come up with something someday, but right now I love it. And so just do your homework would be my advice. What else? Yes.
Are dahlias just for us, just because they're so beautiful, or do they attract insects?
Dahlias, I've seen plenty of insect activity on my dahlias. In fact, if I don't cut them to bring them in for cut flowers, they begin to degrade pretty fast from all the use by bees. And I haven't seen too many butterflies on them. But again, I don't slow down long enough to see that. But dahlias are my favorite flower. I don't see them as being one of the keystone species for attracting songbirds. Yes. Okay. Do you know the actual scientific name? Okay. Yeah. So I know there are honeysuckles that are invasive, the Asian varieties. So that's probably a good sign. If something's making copies of itself everywhere, it could be considered invasive. Theoretically, we say that natives can't be called invasive. They can be spready. They can be aggressive, right? But invasive is a term that applies to edging out native plants. Yeah, maybe send John and I a photo and we can help ID it for you.
Christina, you referenced ground rodents eating plant roots. What is the best way to manage those pests, or i.e. get rid of them? Because my yard in Pittsburgh is riddled with moles and voles.
Okay, so there are repellents for moles and voles, and they work to varying degrees. It really depends on your personal situation. What I have learned is that if I am proactive in using Permatil, or Vole Block is the latest trade name for it, and encasing plants in that vault of gravel, and I don't like to kind of burrow through that helps. But if it's something that I like, coneflowers that I hadn't considered that they were going to burrow underneath and eat, I've sort of, that train has left the station by the time I've planted the plant and it's been in the ground a few years. So then I have to use the repellents, and the repellents work by starting at the plant and encircling it and on top of the ground, and then widening your circle out. And they have to be reapplied. It's a challenge, to be sure. But if you're making the environment somewhat unfriendly by removing harborage, think about the type of rodent that you're dealing with. Where is their burrow? Is it underground? Is it in your garage? Is it in a wood pile? If you're able to remove the things that make that area of your garden attractive, they'll move on. Sort of like deer repellent. I find that at the beginning of each season, as different flowers bloom or different plants leaf out, if I go ahead and use deer repellents then, and I mix it up, I'll use some sprays and some granulars, because the sprays are washed off by rain, the granulars are activated by rain. So I do both. I find that it sends them to the neighbors. I'm sorry. So I'm kind of just dissuading them from even coming into the garden in the first place. It for sure is a challenge to continually try to outsmart, whether it's rodents or any other mammals. But, you know, we got to think too about they need to eat, they need to live. I mean, other things get eaten by them. So what we don't do is poison them,
Right.
because then, you know, your owls and other birds of prey are going to be affected and right on up the food web. Yes.
Thank you.
So there's a company in Durham called I Must Garden.
Mhm.
And this is just one of many that I've used, but I've had really good success with it. I Must Garden makes it's just called mole and vole repellent. And you can get it in a small canister for just a few plants or a big jug for a larger garden area. It works, but it does have to be reapplied. So mole and vole repellent by I Must Garden.
Is that also workable for chipmunks? I mean, pretty much.
Don't know because I have hawks, so I don't have any chipmunks.
Yay.
I know. Yes, back here. Absolutely. Okay, so mosquitoes, a natural way to reduce the mosquito population is to construct a trap. And you can Google these things. It's super easy. You need one of those $2.99 buckets from the big box store or wherever. And you know, you're going to put some grass clippings in there and water. And as the organic matter ferments, it attracts the female mosquitoes. And they're going to go right on in there, and you don't have to worry about baby mosquitoes if you don't have female mosquitoes. There are more elaborate traps that you can buy commercially, and I have 4 of those. I put them around all 4 corners of my garden. But that was before I learned about the DIY version. So they are attracted to the rotting plant material in there. I'm not too sure of how they actually expire, but I'm going to go home and Google it myself now. I just know I've seen easier ways to do it. Yes.
This considered, I think there is some mass here.
So, yeah, mass tears are a really interesting topic. You know, nature has a way of providing, right? So when there's a robust population of mammals and blue jays and things that need acorns, all of a sudden, you know, the trees decide, hey, I need to make sure there's more of me. And so I'm going to put out a whole lot of acorns this year. Obviously, trees are not sentient creatures. They don't actually think like that. They don't think, but they're responding to environmental stimuli and conditions in the climate. And so they put out all these acorns, and then there's enough food to support a burgeoning population of, for example, squirrels. So then there's more squirrels, and then there's not enough food, and the cycle kind of goes in the other direction. There's a great book on the topic by Dr. Doug Tallamy, The Nature of Oaks. I highly recommend this book. It is one that you can start reading now. Go to the November chapter, because the way he structures it is you're reading about what's going on with your oak tree month by month. So you can start anywhere. You can start in November. You don't have to start in, you know, chapter 1. And it tells you what's happening and how you can appreciate it. Just don't park under it, is what I would tell you, because you don't want those little dents in your hood or in your head. So mass years are interesting. You know, was it last year or 2 years ago that everybody said we were having a mass year? I had one oak tree that put out not one acorn. So I don't know. I mean, it just seems very localized.
It's a bumper year this year.
Bumper year. I got hit on the head with one the other day after it bounced off my truck cover, my bed cover, and it still hurt. And it didn't have to go that far. So imagine if it was a direct hit. Yeah. All right. One more.
Challenge that this year on clean up? Let it die by itself, well, once it's dead, what to cut back? How do I not kill the bugs, that are in there now that I'd like to have over winter? I just never know what.
Great question. I would say resist the temptation to be too tidy in the garden. If you have an area that you feel is more ornamental and more for the neighbors and for curb appeal, you may wish to clean up that bed and not clean up some that are closer to the house that are more private, or only clean up certain things. You know, if there's still seeds on coneflowers and black-eyed Susan, I'm leaving them. If there's hollow stems and things like daylilies, those are very useful for native bees. You know, they're going to use those stems as nurseries. So go easy on it. But as in the example I gave of in the mountains, they had pretty much eaten all my coneflower seeds. So there were very few left. So I said, okay, I'm going to use those to repopulate the patch of coneflowers. Leave the leaves. We all hear that this time of year, right? Do you have fireflies? Some, maybe less than what we used to have when we were kids. So they need the leaf litter to overwinter. And so leave your leaves in your beds. I actually was online looking at a leaf vacuum this morning, so I could go across the lawn and get all the leaves up and then, you know, mulch them up and put them back in the beds. I used to do that with just my push mower and the bagger attachment. I'm too old for that. That is not happening anymore. And if you just put the whole leaves in the beds, you're going to get more slugs and snails than you want. So they really kind of are better if you can chop them up. That's a tremendously environmental approach because you're not only getting the benefit to the insects and other ground life, but you're also getting free nitrogen, free mulch. So, you know, a lot of botanical gardens use it. That's a pretty good clue that it's a good thing to use. Well, thank you very much, folks.
Thank you everyone for coming in today. Again, we'll see you next Tuesday. Eric from Old Salem is going to be in town, or not in town, but here. So we're looking forward to his presentation. And we'll just continue this on throughout the end of the season. So again, if you haven't been to the conservatory, wander over there. It's especially on a cool morning, head over there. It's nice and toasty.
I'll hang out for a few minutes if there's any other questions you didn't get to. Water.